Look at that. Redwood just went 1.0. It's about time. It's been like 2 years. Huh. How can a tree go 1.0? What? No, the JavaScript framework. Java. Oh, let me instantiate an abstract interface service worker bean. No, JavaScript. Oh. Hey, have you tried building a web app with JavaScript lately? It's a nightmare. Oh man, I know, it sucks. But that's why Redwood's so great. Everything's already set up and ready to go. You can just start building a full stack app, front end and back end. Not have to worry about all that config. Like Webpack? Yeah, it's ready to go. Babel? Included. TypeScript? Yeah, I know. But it's in there. Everything's TypeScripted. TypeScriptable? Okay, but there's a million other things you need for a full stack app. Some kind of SPA library, an API server. If it's full stack, you need access to a database. You gotta have some kind of auth, tests. It's got all that. React, GraphQL, Prisma, Storybook, Jest. Huh. It really does sound like it has everything. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Why do they call it Redwood? I don't know. They like trees, I guess. Yeah, trees are cool. Yeah. So you gonna give it a try? Planting a tree? No, Redwood. Oh, no. I only write Java.
All right. This is where you tell me that the audio worked, because that was phenomenal, and I will absolutely do it again if not. Hello. Welcome to the Redwood Partners Office Hours Part 2. Is anyone, oh, you know what? I know what's going on. I need to flip a switch here and get some people on audio. Start video. You should be able to come up on screen. There we are. Michael, wait, Mr. Who is Michael Chan? Is that a keyboard in front of you? Are you going to play us a tune?
Oh, I wish I was that cool. No, it's just my laptop. I know. Super not exciting.
it looks really good. Did the audio come through? Please tell me that
it came through.
Okay.
It was perfect. Master of ceremonies. Crushing it.
Yeah. Trees are cool.
Trees are cool.
Trees. Should we just watch it again? I mean, we don't have to talk about it. We can just watch the video again. There he is. All right. Well, everyone here, a little bit of orientation about what's going to happen. This is where the Redwood team gets to hang out with all these people that we've been working with. Oh, a little Snaplet call out there. I didn't get my... We're a little loopy. It's been a week. That's Snap. Sorry. That's
not appropriate.
That's it's on video now. That's snappy. So Partners Office Hours, Redwood hit 1.0. It's been 2 years of a public process, open source project, working in collaboration with a community that's grown and grown, and something that if you're coming on board as a contributor or using Redwood to build something amazing for the first time, something you don't see is all of the amazing collaborations that are happening behind the scenes with partners and companies like Storybook. And this was a way, when I envisioned and dreamed up just who do we want to hang out with to celebrate launch week, it was all these people that we've spent time with their technology, but their teams making Redwood better. And it's been really fun. So Michael Chan from Storybook and Chromatic is here to join us. We're going to talk more there. If you come on as an audience member participating, you'll be in the chat. We will be looking for questions. There's also Q&A. We'll look at the Q&A questions as well. And is there anything else? I think that's it. We can do audio. We'll try to take questions. But most of all, I just want to hand things over to Chan. And what should we talk about? Tell us about Storybook.
I'm on the spot now. I don't know.
I was trying. I'm just trying to transition. Trying to not talk anymore. Running on coffee, man. Running on coffee.
I love it. Well, hey, just first, congratulations. I'm super excited about all the stuff that you have done. V1 is such a big milestone, and it's very exciting to just see the community rallying around what you're doing this week. It's been a huge honor and a super fun process to just be part of you planning this week and kind of figuring out how we were gonna, get some content out there around Redwood and Storybook and the awesome things that you've integrated into it. I have to say, I'm just gonna kind of go out there and gush for a second. I am super excited about, like, I've been using Storybook for, I don't know, like probably like through, I don't know, 3 years or something like that to document design systems. And I think that's really like what a lot of people use it for, is documenting design systems. But really that's limited to people who have like big companies and like a team that they can dedicate to this effort of building components for the rest of the company. And like, that's cool, but it's kind of like naturally exclusive. It's for big companies. And something that you've really modeled, and something I'm excited about, is this idea of really supporting that startup, like the really like the side gig project, that thing that you have in your mind and you think that it could be something big eventually, but you don't have the team yet to dedicate to, you know, something like a design system or a component library. You're just building it as you build it. And I think that's something that I'm really attracted to in Redwood, and seeing you all kind of like lead like what that looks like in Storybook. Because up to this point, we haven't had a good story for it. And so it's really cool to see what you're doing. The way that I swear I've been like obsessed with this notion of a cell. I think it's so freaking great. And the fact that you have, you know, stories for all of the individual states, like things that actually developers care about when they're developing a feature, like it just blows me away. So honestly, I'm just gushing for a second, but I think that what you're doing is so cool. And it's actually like guiding the way that we are starting to think about and communicate the value of Storybook to developers, not just teams of, you know, designers and component library and, you know, what front end architect type people at big companies. Done.
Thank
Mic
you.
drop. See ya.
I mean, the
I'll
fact that
comment.
like yeah, you comment. The fact that we're inspired by Storybook and trying to follow your lead, like, thank you, Tom.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there, which is if you work with your components and you create them in Storybook first, where you don't have to worry about where your data is coming from, and Redwood helps you mock out your data fetching, and you can see your different states of your data fetching, from the loading to an empty state, to the successful state, to error state. And you can see that all in Storybook all at once. And you do that from the beginning, you're building up your design resource over time, just by virtue of the way that you're designing your product, you're designing everything. And what's really hard is to go in much later after you've designed all these components and then be like, all right, let's build out our design reference and documentation. And now you're going to spend hundreds of hours doing that if you had just started that way from the beginning, like we're trying to make possible with Redwood, then it'll just be there from the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's that concept is so important, because there are like, obviously you can't predict the future, right? Like you never know what's going to work. And so you want to put like as little effort in as possible at the beginning, when it's just you sitting at your computer, or like just a couple of you at your computer. You want to put your effort on the right things. And the fact that Redwood just kind of makes it easy to like fall into like, okay, well, we'll use this generator because that's the easiest way to get this thing up and running. And then now you just kind of happen to have these cases now for that, like without having to have put in any work. And now you can go back to those and see like, oh yeah, like cool. Now we can actually start, you know, pulling out some of these pieces into a design system or component library for repeatability across. Like I love it. It's like such a good model. I dig it, into it.
I'm grabbing a few links here. What I wanted to show, there's a lot to show about what Redwood can do with Storybook. And I'm behind on getting some of that out there, but let me grab a couple links I want to share now, and there's more to come. But Chan, tell us, it's already been announced and it's public, but there's some new things you can do with Storybook that we've been talking about collaborating on to make more tightly. But yeah, tell us, like, there's not just like design time features that are available now. There's more you can do, like as we talk about this whole like CI/CD workflow, right? Of
Totally.
working full stack. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Let me grab some links while you're doing that.
Yeah, totally. And then I'm going to paste a link in right now. This is an interview that I did with Tom a couple of weeks ago on our Storybook channel. And so you can hear more about, I mean, obviously the announcements that you're talking about this week, but specifically some of that Storybook integration and kind of how that helps you through the process. Yeah, so there's a handful of really cool things coming to Storybook that I'm really excited about. I think 6.5 is coming out pretty soon, and we're really focusing on a lot of the interaction side of testing your components. And we have this cool new thing called play functions, and there's not a ton of documentation out there on that yet, but you can find some of it on our website, storybook.js.org. And what play functions do is they allow you to actually like interact with your story and compose stories from other stories. It's kind of hard to talk about in the abstract. So, I mean, the documentation and the blog post will do a better job of describing it. But effectively, you could take a story that you have right now. Let's say you have a navbar story, and you want to you want to create different stories for like the logged in state, that maybe shows the user's name and a sign out button, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, with play functions and Storybook component story format 3, you actually take that story, spread it like with a spread operator across like a logged in story, and then actually write play functions using testing library to actually interact with that thing through DOM operations and say like, hey, click the login button, fill out the form, and then now you have that other story, and we test it in the state at the end of that of all of those interactions. So I think that's something that is going to be like just really killer, because it takes a lot of the time piece of it out of it, right? Like you're not like going into like some end testing framework and then having to actually navigate through the application. You just have that one component, you're operating on it in specific ways, and then good to go. So yeah, I think that's something that I think is going to be really big. I think it's super important for components, because there's just so much complexity inside of just individual components. Being able to isolate out those interactions in just one way is going to be really killer. So that's something I'm really excited about. So Storybook interactions, interaction testing. We have a whole new test runner that allows you to do, like run your Jest tests, like actually on the browser, and there's linking back between the terminal and it's nuts.
Check out Pete. Now on the Redwood core team has been building out. I link to it. There's an example Storybook repo in Redwood, and he's just building that in. So he's taking what you get with Redwood now in stories, and then he's just adding the test runner on top of it. We already have Jess there. Oh, there's Pete. We should have Pete.
Hey,
Where
Pete.
are you? Hey, Pete, send that to everybody. Do you want to just do a quick share here up on stage? And we do, I want to keep talking forever, but we have more people coming on too. So we'll overlap this, but Pete, there you go. Sharing with everybody. Here he is. Pete, tell us about this thing. If you're not in a place to come on stage, or you could even just do audio. I just invited you to come up. But that, again, we've seen the link there, more to come, but we're really excited. And this is, again, because we've been collaborating with you all, and Jan's been helping out, but Pete's taking the lead on this project. So it's really cool stuff. Chan.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, it's super cool. And I can't take any credit for any of it. Like, I'm just like a person who like comes onto these things and waves their hands a little bit and like is excited about stuff. But there's some seriously cool stuff happening. Honestly, like our blog, we're always talking, kind of showing off what we like pre-release type stuff, like, hey, this is something that we're working towards, and then you get to see the progress, like all for all of these features as they're developed. So I mean, similar to you, I mean, like developing out in the open is super scary, because you make all these promises that you don't know if you'll be able to keep, and so, but it's all the more sweet when you actually get to that point and you're like, hey, you know what, we actually did the thing that we said we were going to do.
It only took us literally 1 year longer than I thought it would. Well, a year. So, you get in the ballpark within a year, for me is good.
Pete, did we do justice in explaining what you've been building in that example repo?
For sure. It's still in a beta state. So I recommend, as a lot of other guests on here, to open PRs and contribute. But in terms of just proof of concept, I took the examples that Michael was mentioning from their Storybook blog posts and kind of adapted it to the forms and cells and such that you get out of the box from Redwood, just so as a starting point. But I really think there's a lot more that we could do there in terms of like layouts. And he's talking about logged in states, so you could really see how composing the initial, play actions and then building on there can be super beneficial. So totally stoked to do more there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for taking lead. Jan.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I love that. I mean, you've done amazing stuff, and it's really cool to see. It's really cool to see your work. So thank you for kind of like showcasing all of these cool stuff. And I want to like just repeat that idea of spreading stories is so like it's just so fun, because I think for me, like I'm like the world's most mediocre developer. And so like when I think about things like before we're in a competition, I feel like we're trying really hard to beat each other on that. Like for some reason, like before and like before each and after each and all that kind of stuff have always like confused me, and they always get in the way when I'm like trying to do tests and like test setups in particular. And so spreading out another test just makes a lot more sense to me, because you're like taking something that exists and then just saying like it's not really like a before this test, it's just a part of this test. So I really like that model a lot better than the before each, all that kind of stuff, where everything's kind of like, where is it doing the thing that I don't expect it to do? Oh, it's way the hell up here in this file.
Chan, thank you. This is the spirit of this is I just keep the conversations rolling. So we're gonna give Anurag and talk about render a bit of time.
Yeah.
But there's more to come. You're please feel free to stick around and stay.
Yeah, I'll be here.
If you want to join us for the witty banter, like just don't leave the stage. Like it's fantastic. Jam on the keyboard. Last question for you.
Yeah.
We huge fans of Storybook. Like, what are other ways that the Redwood community can help Storybook in the work you all are doing?
Oh, honestly, I feel like just leading the charge on helping developers in their journey to building robust UIs and making the UX of the web better. That is something that we're learning. Like we know how to do that in like design systems land. We don't really know how to communicate that to developers. And so it's been really fun to learn that just alongside you. But I mean, honestly, the more startups, the more like developers and like indie hackers that you help like kind of into that Storybook world, the more we learn and the better we can make that product for everybody, not just people with huge design teams. So super excited to see kind of like where that goes in the next in the next year.
Ditto. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for
much
having me
more to
on.
come.
This is super
Oh,
fun.
You bet, isn't it? So here we go and this is just like what happens when you do full stack, right? We're going from front end first design, and now we're going to talk deploy target, and like you need to do it all, right? So it takes all of us working together. So Chan, more to come. Thank you.
Yeah.
And let's talk about render. Render was one of we had a lot of requests for render before you all came on and made it possible. But render was really the first official non-Jamstack serverless deploy target for Redwood. And it opened up a lot of startups and devs I know at the time to be able to deploy differently and add a lot more features and functionality to the apps that they needed that were non-serverless. So welcome, over to you. Oh, no microphone. There you go.
Thanks, David. We've been obviously talking for a long time, and I've been excited about Redwood from the very beginning. I think the need for Redwood is obviously very clear, and it has been very clear from day one. And I've been really impressed by the care that the team has put into crafting this experience. Quick background on render. Our goal in this context is to make render the best place for you to not just start out with your Redwood apps, but also scale your Redwood apps and actually become a big company that's based entirely on Redwood. And to that end, obviously we give you a way to start easily and quickly with something like Postgres. But then you also will eventually need something like Redis maybe, or you might need a full stack CDN, or things like just logging. Where do you send your logs from your Redwood instance? How do you connect your Redwood instance from other services with private networking? Like all of these things become much more important as your application grows, as your needs grow. And the goal with Render is to support that. And obviously, we've all looked at Heroku and we know how it has stagnated over time. And one of the biggest problems, or what we hear from Heroku users who migrate over to us, is that it's too inflexible or the costs just don't make sense as you scale. And those are the two problems that Render is solving for everyone who wants to use Redwood or anything else. I mean, we have people who are using us just for static sites. We also obviously have folks who are using us for the full stack. We have managed Postgres and Redis products, and we effectively replace your DevOps team. And we actually have companies that started out with 3 people on Render and are now, over 100 people and valued at over $1 billion. And they're using Render still and don't want to move, for example, to AWS. So I'll stop pushing Render now, and I'll open it up to questions.
I invited you here to push Render, so thank you. You're not disappointing. The only thing I'll add to that is that Rosalind on your team wrote a very lovely article that just went out, and we reposted that. So Pullflow, a startup built on Redwood. Zach and his team are doing a wonderful job. If you're not using Pullflow, oh yeah, I think you guys might be at Render. Great video from yesterday, Redwood.js YouTube. Check out Pullflow. Anyway, Rosalind wrote a wonderful article about Pullflow's experience. So Redwood-based startup, and they're deploying on Render. And if you want to know what the experience is like, you can check it out there. So just posted that in the chat. But yeah, thank you. We've done a lot of work together.
Done a lot of work together, and there's still more work to do.
Yeah, totally. Burning a little memory there at deploy time. What are the things you wish Redwood startups, Redwood projects knew they could do on Render that they're not taking advantage of yet?
That's a great question. I think as startups get bigger, there are things like auto scaling and instrumentation. So you can integrate we give you basic metrics on your CPU and memory usage, and when you start looking at databases, things like connection counts and all of that. But if you wanted to spin up object storage on Render, you can do that. If you want to spin up your own Elasticsearch on Render, you can do that. All of these things are set up as templates under the GitHub Render examples repository, or that organization specifically. And Render replaces the need for having to set up some sort of system to continuously deploy your app. Obviously, you can use GitHub Actions, but also Render has built-in CI/CD. And for folks who are working on larger teams, it's very easy for you to create a private network on Render that allows you to be much more secure than you would on something like Heroku. Like databases, for example, can be completely sealed off from the internet, and you can use an internal URL, which we give you out of the box, for your database. And the same thing applies to Redis, or even a private service like Elasticsearch. So if you want to spin up your own Elasticsearch using a Docker container, we allow you to create services with persistence. So there's no 12-factor evangelism here. We don't care, to be honest, how you build your app. We want to meet you where you are, and so you're not locked in effectively to something that teaches you or forces an opinion of building your app in a certain way. And yeah, that's probably what I would start with when people are thinking about, okay, well, we're starting on Redwood, how do you get big on it? There was a question on Hacker News yesterday where someone was like, well, all these frameworks are great and all, but once you start doing something more complex, then you run into edge cases. But I think that that's kind of the solution. Well, Redwood obviously is evolving in that direction as well. Like Redwood would like to have large startups or large companies using the platform and helping drive those the features that solve for those edge cases. And I think Render has been similar. We launched in 2018, and since then it's been a constant exercise in continuing to build for the next size of company.
Well, I'll say that you all are one of the top choices for people building with Redwood right now. If serverless use case doesn't work as well as they want, you were very early in integrating with our deployment system and getting that up and running. And so a huge thanks for that, and really expanding what we conceived of as usable deploy platforms. You know, we started with more of a Jamstack thing in mind, but then we realized, well, there are use cases, lots of use cases where people need performance, or they need persistence, or they need to do something real time, or they need to run background jobs and they don't want to use some separate service. All of these things require a more persistent capabilities, and Render brings all of that to bear. And so we see some of the larger startups that are built with Redwood on Render today. I think it was one of the most popular deployment targets.
That's great to hear. Yeah. And again, I think the best validation for a framework as well as a cloud provider is companies starting on it and growing with it and getting to reasonable scale. And so we're super excited about what startups are doing on Redwood and how they're getting big and how we can support them. The other thing that's coming is Render obviously combines the thing around static sites and databases. And so you don't have to have different providers for each thing. And we're working on a tutorial. We have been working on a tutorial for some time now that has all of these things, including something like SQLite or even just Postgres, but on a completely free tier, on Render's free tier. There's some memory issues that we want to solve on, I think it's maybe around Prisma usage. But once that's ready to go, you will be able to do like a full stack Redwood thing for free on Render and try it out that way. And I think it'll help a lot of developers get started without worrying about putting their credit cards in.
Yeah, that's amazing. Be able to deploy for free your full stack. Speaking of things that with infrastructure we just couldn't do years ago. So, and by the way, I think someone else helped us figure out what to do about the. And again, it's only if you're using the free tier, but the MIM issue when we're deploying. So we might have a way.
Oh,
I know. Just been a little busy this week.
Yeah, I mean, you can always, obviously on our $7 plan, you can use that and get going. But we want you to not have to worry about it and to be able to just stay on the free plan to try things out, because that's what developers do. We want to try things out before we invest in them. And whatever we can do to support that with Redwood especially, I would love to do.
Absolutely. Any other questions? We're waiting. We've got, Lee is coming up next. I think he's just joining here in a second, but we do have time. Is there any other questions from chat? Tom or Rob, any other questions? I always have my final question, which we could go to. The final question. It sounds so.
The final question.
The final, it's always the same. Exciting. What? Yeah. Like, especially you all are a startup as well. What are other ways? I love what you said about, because I see this happening in the Redwood community. These are newer projects, newer startups, and maybe not quite yet thinking about all the other things they're going to need, infrastructure and DevOps entirely, right? And that just comes as you grow with scale. And I love that you spoke to that. But what are other ways the Redwood community can help Render? I mean, we're in it with you. We want Render to grow with Redwood as well. So
I appreciate that question. I think it's mostly just giving us feedback as you go through deployment on Render. We're hypersensitive to user feedback in general, because that's the big difference between Render and say AWS. We listen to developers and actually make changes and improvements to the application based on feedback from developers who are starting new projects versus 5,000 person companies with massive DevOps and IT budgets. So if any feedback we can get would be great. We have a public feature requests board, which some of you might have seen already if you're familiar with Render, but you go to feedback.render.com, you can submit feature requests, but you can also go to community.render.com and just ask us things or find ways for you to do your job better on Render. And you can always email support@render.com as well. And then when you log in, you get, when you first create your account, you get access to chat, and you can, there are a bunch of different ways to get in touch with us, and we'd love to hear from you. And of course, feel free to email me. I just posted my email address in chat.
I love that. By the way, if people don't know, you're speaking to the CEO of Render right now, who just gave you his email address. So if that doesn't back up everything you just said about, which I've witnessed in our community, your desire to be close to the people that are using your products. Yeah, very much so. So thank you. And for every time I've sent out the SOS message from our community forums or our GitHub request, and Sean or Chris has shown up, and you, thank you so much. That's just
we're super excited about what y'all are doing, and I think Redwood has an amazing future ahead of it, and we're very excited to be a tiny part of it.
Well, thank you, and right back at you. It's really been a pleasure. So for all the hours we've spent late nights debugging things together,
we're at the end. We're
so
there, and I think we'll find more things as people scale. And again, we're excited to have this like shared Slack channel that we've used so effectively so far.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to bring up the next guest. You're free to stick around. You probably have some other things to do as well.
I do have another meeting, but
you should go do that.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. And,
thanks, David.
We'll keep going. You have a good day.
Thank you all. Bye.
All right. There we go. Is that working? We have Lee. Nice. Lee, can you hear me? Hey, there it is. So thank you for coming. This is the day when you missed the video at the intro, but this is a day where we get to hang out with all of the people and the companies and the projects that we've spent time with for the last 2 years that have contributed to making Redwood what it is today. And the team at Vercel has very much been a part of that process. There are a lot of hours put in early on, well before 1.0, to make deployment happen from Redwood, one line, and boom, you're on the Vercel network. And thank you. So that's where we wanted to start it. By the way, this is Lee from Vercel, and thank you for joining us, Lee.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here and help celebrate with y'all. It's a very exciting day.
Yeah, very fun. So okay, Tom, I think Tom can come back on. Okay, there's a lot of things we could talk about, and I could dive into those really quickly. But is there anything on Vercel and Redwood deployment wise that you wanted to hit before we just kind of run through some questions, and we could take some questions from chat as well?
Yeah, the one thing that I thought was really, I just wanted to give you a little kudos that I liked with the announcement post was really highlighting customers who are succeeding with Redwood. I loved that. I also loved the messaging of focusing on building your startup. I think that's incredible. And I know that I've heard from customers of Vercel who also use Redwood, and it sounds like people are really enjoying the combination there. So major kudos to y'all.
Thank you. We've had some questions about that as well as its uniqueness, but that's what's made it really fun. If you get a chance or haven't yet, the startup showcase that we did yesterday, recorded and posted it onto our YouTube channel, was really a highlight for us because these are people, and in many cases, everyone was dropping the version that they started their project on with Redwood. 0.2 was one of the earliest ones, and that code base now evolved is still up and in production today. That's TeamStream I'm thinking of. But for the core team and the community of contributors, like watching that yesterday it was just wind in our sails. It was an exceptional highlight to see what people are doing with this. And I know you know that experience and feeling, and it's why we're doing this. So thank you. It's really been important to us. Yeah, Tom, Rob, I've got more questions, but I know, Tom, you had to jump for a second.
Sorry, just my terrible internet. I think they're doing some work on the networks right now.
Okay.
Hi, Lee. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm great.
Okay,
What
yeah, go
what
ahead.
can we do to leverage Vercel more effectively? Like, are there things, like one thing that we'd really love to do better is SSR. This will be something that we're approaching hopefully for V2. Are there ways that we can hook better into Vercel to take advantage of that? Is that something that third parties can leverage?
Yeah, so I'd love to just talk briefly about how we're thinking about being a platform that is extensible for any framework in the world. And the version of this that we're on right now is what we're calling currently a file system API, or a build API is essentially what it is. It's a way for you to specify some output that your frame, I mean, you could build your own framework, you could build your own bundler. It's like just some output format that you can put your output code into, and that will take advantage of essentially every feature or every product on the entire Vercel platform. And the reason for that is it's kind of like a clear contract between framework developer and then infrastructure from code. So for example, one thing that could be really interesting, I've been talking to a lot of framework authors and a lot of people, there's, a shift towards what would rendering at the edge look like? How would I enable that? Specifically, server rendering my application logic. Maybe I'm going to do some fetch and then return some HTML. How can I enable that through my framework such that there's a kind of a level of abstraction on top of the infra provider that I want to use? And I think that that's something that could be really interesting to work on together and enable that different set of constraints for server rendering at the edge. Not necessarily a silver bullet, but because there's smaller function sizes, some constraints on the type of code you can run, but with those trade-offs, you can unlock some really great performance.
Okay, yeah, the world does seem to be moving more towards this edge function kind of conception. React 18 makes some interesting things possible with streaming updates. I think it's an exciting world available to us now at the various platforms and technologies. And now that we're done with 1.0, I'm excited to be able to work on new features again, and we can start exploring some of these things. It'd be awesome.
I know Danny, who's not able to join us. Danny's a part of the core team and also built tape.sh. Tape.sh is deployed on Vercel, and he works closely with your team. And it's a great case study for us because Danny is always looking for what's available on Vercel. And he's done the Redwood pre-render feature and made sure that that's got first-class compatibility. So he's working on and looking into what can be done with the file system API. And another thing, even just yesterday, this was talked about. We need to work up some examples of the Redwood API running Next, the Redwood API running Svelte on the front end. It's something I talked to you about weeks ago, and then this whole event got busy. But even just yesterday in the forums and I think on Discord, if Anthony's around, but there's some Svelte and Redwood JS API examples that are getting spun up, and it's going to be fun. So there's a lot of ways. I think people don't really understand where Redwood fits into a Next ecosystem, and rightfully so, because they're all React, so what's different about it? It would be fun to show people the use cases where those two things match up. So anyway, watch out, because I'm going to be in your DMs asking if you want to help. Does that sound good? Are you in? You're live and being recorded, but are you up for that?
Yeah, that sounds great. I think there's a parallel track there, which is one, when you build an experience like Redwood that bundles a lot of things together for you, sometimes people don't realize the ways that you can unbundle it and still get a lot of value, aka just the API piece, right? And then I think too, when you look at something like in Next.js, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of people use Next.js just for the front end. Like, they're not building a full stack application with it. So you can pair it with the tools that will give you an API out of a box pretty easily.
And I hear that Svelte guy, he's pretty popular. He's now hanging out with you all as well. But that's like, I think maybe as much as next, but that's the request. Mr. Svelte. Oh, that's good, Anthony.
Yeah,
Anthony,
Mr. Svelte.
Mr.
Yeah,
Svelte.
it's been great having Rich around. Just really smart, kind person, and I've learned a lot definitely just from learning more about how SvelteKit works and building applications with it. It's helped because I have a history with React, so now getting exposed to even more stuff, more hands-on, it really just helps shape your worldview of web development.
Maybe it's time for a svelte side for Redwood.
Yeah.
That's where I was trying to get to uneloquently. But yeah, that fun. And that's the unbundling piece. People don't think about Redwood as, being used over here for your API, but those things will be fun. Lee, again, there's so many people on the dev team at Vercel that we would love to thank, and we've been doing so, but really help make the collaboration possible. And it's just such a joy in the open source ecosystem to get to collaborate with so many different people across so many different technology stacks. And it's really just been a pleasure. So really appreciate you all, and just grateful for the time Vercel has put into Redwood over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I can only take an extremely small amount of credit because the people on the Vercel team just do an incredible amount of work, incredible job. So major kudos to them, and thank you for all your work too.
Yeah, it's been really fun. I think Anthony just posted there the proofing. Oh, it's just a screenshot.
Nice.
All right.
Let the hype build.
Let the hype build. Oh, we're getting better at building hype. We're actually we're working on telling people about the things that we do, Lee. That's a new skill set for us. Wouldn't you say? Well, now we've got Rob. Who knew? Have you seen Rob Cameron's recent videos? Like,
I enjoyed those.
we kind of knew, but we really didn't know. And by the way, we've been deving 2 years now, building out features, getting things going. And then the Do It video hits the internets, and all of the downloads double in a day from one viral. It's like, why?
My favorite part about that is I hadn't seen the Do It video in like a little while. And then I was like, man, this video is still so good. Like, that's going to live on in internet infamy. Like, you can drop the Do It, and it makes everything better.
Got something right. Yeah, you got. Oh, Rob. Well done.
Thank you.
Lee, thank you. Okay, so next up, you've seen how we go. We just kind of keep flowing here. You're welcome to stay. You may have other things going, but Mike, do you know about Gitpod? Have you used Gitpod? Oh, did I say Lee or Rob? I think I meant to say Lee.
Do I know about Gitpod?
You know about Gitpod?
I do know about Gitpod. It's very interesting. I've only used it, I think, twice, but I had a great experience both times.
Okay, so I don't want to spoil what Mike's about to tell us, but Mike has done some phenomenal work to enable really first-class onboarding, both for like a developer side, so like within a PR and a virtual environment you get, and then also is starting a new project. And that's what Mike's about to share. But anyway, Mike has been wonderful. Lee, thank you. Again, stick around as long as you would like. Appreciate you taking some time. And we'll keep thanking the rest of the Vercel team and the DMs. But
of
a
course.
lot more to come.
Awesome. Thank you all.
All right, Mike. No pressure.
So you have to look at me from like bottom up. My camera up there seems not to work. So apologies for that angle. That's horrible. Yeah, bear with me. So basically, I've been trying to put what is Gitpod into words for like 2 years, and I just keep failing. I think the best way to describe it is to experience it. So I'm going a little bit off script, and I'm going to share my screen to do 2 demos with 1 click each to show you what Gitpod is. And let me just see how this all works here.
You should be able to share.
All right, green button right here. Perfect. Window.
Now, if I was going to spell Gitpod, do I capitalize the P?
You do whatever you feel like. I came to the conclusion that the best thing to do, and Tom's tweet really helped with that.
It's the only
I found
way.
peace.
Just give up now. Just give up now. Every day I'm like, trying to write tweets being like, the H in GitHub's capitalized. And every time I don't, because I don't wanna be that guy.
Yeah, I came to the conclusion that, peace of mind is the best. It's all good. Okay, so I think you can see my screen. It should be big enough as well. But what I want to show you is this is the Redwood repository. If you want to contribute to it, you have kind of two options. You can click on the contributing MD file and follow along. Do that on your local machine. Or you can do that one-click thingy I promised. And you do see a Gitbot button here. That's because I have the browser extension installed. The alternative is you go to the URL, you prefix the whole thing, gitbot.io/hash, and hit enter. Because I promised a click, I'm going to do a click. So we click Gitbot. What this does is it spins up a developer environment in the cloud. It's basically your own computer that you get access to. And you can see loading pre-built. What that does is it already installed dependencies. That happens every time somebody pushes code to GitHub. This notifies Gitbot. We download the repository, run the dependencies. So you don't have to wait for that. Now, the other thing it does is it spins up VS Code. You could use IntelliJ or your own JetBrains IDEs, Vim, whatever you want. And you see that we have two terminals down here. It's telling me that there's a new port available, 8910, which is obviously the Redwood application. And as a contributor, I basically now have a Redwood directory, which is the source code of the Redwood framework. And I have a RV test app, which is a Redwood application that is linked to the Redwood framework. So I can make changes to the framework, run a command to sync it, and then see that live in my application instantly. So if you have a bug and you want to reproduce that, spin up this, send the link over to the Redwood team, they can reproduce that, look in, debug it, and they're good to go. There's everything you need to know, everything you need to develop Redwood is right here. Now, I can just close that tab and then get another one.
Hang on. This is crazy. I mean, the first time I saw this, I couldn't believe what was going on. Mike came along and enabled this, and it started showing up inside of our PRs. It was one of the GitHub action buttons that showed up. There's this little details thing, and you click on it. So you're in a PR, and you can work out the branch in the PR to test it. So as a maintainer, that's what I'm doing all the time, is checking out PR branches. A lot of CLI works. I'm going to run functional tests on them, and in one click, all that was spinning up for me, and it was amazing. This is so good.
My favorite kind of use case is when you work on a feature and your colleague pings you saying that, hey, can you quickly review my PR? Like, before I knew Gitbot, that would be like a nightmare situation. I'm like, no, not right now. How about like 2 hours later when I'm done with my feature here? I don't want to change my dependencies and pull down code and stash my things. Now I just open a separate tab or a separate workspace and I do my review. I shut it down. I'm back in my feature branch. Keep working the way it used to work. So that's demo number one. I'm going to show you how you can contribute to Redwood with a single click. We're going to shut this down. The other demo I wanted to show you is if you want to start your project or kick off your startup with Redwood.js, we do have a Redwood.js Gitbot starter repo. And same thing here, you click the Gitbot button if you have the extension, or here I can show you the other way. You prefix gitbot.io/hash and you hit enter. Now, obviously, no surprise, that does pretty much the same thing, but it also installs or comes with a Postgres database. So you don't even have to worry about that on your local environment. It's there, it's configured, the Redwood app connects to it. So everything is good. And we'll just give that a second, up and running. And there you go. You're now ready to build your startup and you don't have to worry about setting anything up. You can see the dependencies are already installed. It's doing a few things here to connect to the database and stuff, but everything else here happened way before I even clicked that button. It opens a new tab as well. This is my preview of the Redwood app. So I don't even have to open that. Just really, as I said, one click and you get everything you need. And then I could just go over here and start making my changes to my code. Second tab here with the preview. And once you're ready to make this your own, because right now you just cloned that Redwood template. When you're ready to make this your own, you can use the Git integration here, create a pull request, and Gitpod will notice that you don't have write permissions, and it'll offer you to fork that project. So you can fork it into your own account and push as normal, and then you have your own project. There's literally no work to be done.
I don't think there's
And-
any way possible that you could do that faster. I don't think it's because, I mean, just think about how long it takes to do the Yarn install, like to download 83,000 gigabytes of node modules. It takes like 3 minutes or something, right? If you do this on your local terminal, you're able to pre-build it and spin it up without having to redo all that work every time. It's just, to me, it's magic. I love it.
Yeah. And it's continuous too, right? A code change, somebody pushes something, Gitpod immediately starts to build that stuff. So that by the time you click the button or you open the workspace, you're good to go. Yeah, so I think this does a much better job than me trying to describe what Gitpod does, but I wanted to quickly show you that, how this works. You can do that on any of your repos, Bitbucket, GitLab, GitHub, your own hosted versions of these things. So yeah, short and sweet.
Just amazing. Well, yeah, I mean, sweet indeed. So some things coming up that Mike, we're working on. And again, we had this whole, launch week thing that happened, but documentation so people can understand better what's going on. We're going to have a great video recording now. This is being recorded. We'll share this with the community as well on how to use Gitpod in both ways, developing or contributing in the framework and developing your own app. And we'd like this to be available as an option when people start the Redwood tutorial, which has been a major challenge. If you're working on Windows, Node is just not Windows friendly. And complain about Node modules, but all the Windows developers out there, oh my gosh, I had no idea. But this will make it much more accessible for anyone to both be able to start a Redwood project. But something that's really important to us is the efficiency to onboarding as a contributor and making that as lightweight and accessible to everyone, and regardless of what your tech specs are on your local machine and what operating system you're on. So for us, that's gold. The fact that more people can contribute and be a part of this project on the contribution side is, that's it. That's the number we drive most of all. And this beautifully makes it more accessible. I'm running out of words, but thank you. This is awesome.
Yeah, it's also nice that you don't have to, when new people join your company, they don't use outdated documentation because developers use that every day. So if you have something new, you update it, you update the configuration, it's archived, it's versioned, so you know what's going on.
It's also really great for all of your projects from like a year or two ago that you haven't worked on. I updated my blog for the first time in several years because I have not been blogging very much. But I just put one out and it's a Jekyll site. And you would think I would be able to get Jekyll running, right? But no, it turns out I couldn't get it running on my local machine. And then I'm like, you idiot, just run it on Gitpod. And so I went over to Gitpod and I spun it up and it worked perfectly the first time because it's like, it just pulls the dependencies that are specified. It's not like fighting with all the garbage you have on your local computer. So remember that next time you need to spin up an app from like years ago.
Yeah, I also recently realized that I don't have any SSH keys on my machine anymore. I was like, wait a minute, why is that folder empty? But yeah,
That's
things
really
happen.
nice. Hey, is there anything coming up new? And I don't know, this is not a leading question, with Gitpod that we should know about, or what does a Redwood community, you heard my question to Lee and for you as well, like what are ways that the Redwood community can be a part of what Gitpod is doing, help Gitpod, let people know more about it, and also just take better advantage of what Gitpod has to offer?
Yeah, in terms of features, we recently launched something I'm excited about. It's called multi-repo support. So you can spin up a Gitpod workspace and pull in more than one Git repository. This is really helpful where you have front-end and back-end in two repos. Before you had to do a whole bunch of tunneling and whatnot to make these things talk to each other. Now they're in the same workspace. You can use localhost to communicate. Done. The other thing is, accessing this from your local IDEs, JetBrains, JetBrains and VS Code and Vim and whatnot. You literally just connect to that pod in the cloud, all the compute runs in our environment, in our cloud, and you have just a UI on your local computer. In order to help, I think the easiest thing to do is just prefix your repo with git-pod.io/hash and hit enter and then see what happens. That's probably the easiest way to get started.
That is an easy way to get started. Thank you. Thank you so much. Mike, it's really been a pleasure. We really enjoy working with you. So I'm clicking a couple buttons up here real quick, and just look forward to more. So for everything that you, and I know it's been a lot of you, but also others at the Gitpod team have done to support Redwood, thank you. This community and this project is farther along than it ever could have been because of your help, and it's just paying off in dividends downstream. So more to come, but thank you so much. It has been a lot of fun.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, feel free to stick around, and we're going to bring up Ishan and Tristan next. But thank you, and if you need me to boot you off, just let me know as well. Zoom webinars, who knows how to run them? Layer Zero.
Hey,
welcome.
Thank you.
Newer friends, but definitely friends. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Are we able to get Tristan up here as well?
Oh, I thought I clicked that button. I'm going to click it again. Thank you for letting me know. I end up having to click it a few times. So, yep, it says he's coming up right now.
There we go. He did a lot of the heavy lifting, so he should be here to help celebrate. And first off, congrats again on hitting 1.0. I still remember the tweet, that we're going to do a Ruby on Rails for the JavaScript ecosystem, and couldn't be been more excited, and really excited at the progress you guys have made. I feel like though Layer Zero is probably the least known of your other partners and panelists. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just give people an intro.
Oh, I was hoping you would.
Okay,
yes,
perfect.
Do it.
Let's do that. Just really quick. It'll be a whirlwind tour. I promise, like only 4 slides, and then the rest will just be our console. So
you have to tell people who you are as well. That's my only request.
Oh yeah. So I'm Ishan Nand. I'm VP of Product here at Limelight, and I manage everything that is Layer Zero. Before Layer Zero was acquired by Limelight, I was the CTO and co-founder. And then Tristan is one of our engineers on the platform and framework side. So let me just quickly introduce ourselves in Limelight. So Limelight, if you don't know us, is actually one of the big CDNs, but they really specialize in video. You've probably used Limelight Networks, you just don't know it. We're used by a lot of the big streaming providers. And Layer Zero is basically taking that massive network that is currently being used just for video and applying it to web CDN and to Jamstack. And our Jam is really about bringing the productivity benefits of the Jamstack to really large complex sites. So we have a really good track record at the high end of the market with very large customers, but we're not as well known kind of in the rest of the market, which is why I think people don't know as much about us. And we're trying to correct that moving forward. And including that is our participation and trying to get into more of the frameworks earlier. The very last slide is we are hiring. So I encourage anybody, go ahead, take a look at our jobs page. If you see anything that's interesting to you, just reach out to me on Twitter, and you can skip the whole like pipeline stuff. I will give you a response. Like the worst thing is you send it, it's that black hole. I will personally give you a response if you tweet me in DM. So like I said, we're a Jamstack platform. So, this is our documentation. We support like all the popular frameworks. We've got serverless functions. We've got Redwood.js, thanks to your guys and Tristan's hard work. And you can deploy it right from within the Redwood CLI. We've got a lot of the classic features. You can see all your past history of deployments. You can go to past ones and you can kind of promote them back and forward. So you get rollbacks and stuff like that. One of the real hallmarks of Layer Zero is something we call Edge.js. And that's the ability to control your CDN from within your application code. To us, one of the interesting lessons of Jamstack was it's really another way to get you to serve data from the edge without having to think about it. I sometimes call it a Jedi mind trick that gets you to serve data from the edge. And if you're dealing with very large complex sites, it's not always as possible, but you can get really close by being able to configure the CDN directly from within your code. So what we do is we spider into the application for supported frameworks like Redwood, like Next, like Nux, and we understand all its conventions. So we automatically know how to configure the edge for each of those frameworks. And then you can go on top of that and you can customize how things are done. So this is a Next example here. And let me show you actually our docs. Our docs are actually running on Layer 0. They're actually open source. You can go to GitHub, you can contribute pull requests, so that customers do that. And this is inside the Layer 0 console. And we give you all this data here, obviously about traffic and cache hit rate, but we're able to look at the code and tell you, okay, here's the cache hit rate for this piece of code. Here's the cache hit rate for this piece of code. This one, you've disabled the caching for it. And everything in terms of observability as your application grows is in terms of the way you as the developer thinks about it. So if you want to delve into just, say errors or caching in particular, here we're showing you all your caching, not as individual URLs. That's what a regular CDN would do. But a Jamstack CDN would really talk to it in terms of the routes in your application, the way you think about it when you develop your application. So if you're in your framework and you create a new page, we automatically know what that is. We don't force you to declare it to us or tag it. It just automatically happens as part of your workflow. And then we'll show you things like memory usage, CPU, traffic, cache hit rate, and errors, all in terms of this. All the other screens are all in terms of basically what we say, your routes, how your application is laid out. Another cool feature here, as you guys move towards serverless, is you can in real time look at what's happening inside the cloud in your serverless functions. So here, for example, as I was clicking around the site before we came on, I'm able to see all the requests that my middle tier is making. And I can actually even debug them. I can copy it as curl. I can just go here and I can just copy it right over. And I'm able to just debug things that way. It's really, really helpful for figuring out what's going on in the cloud, or somebody sends you a PR and you want to make sure it's doing everything right. You can obviously look at the deploy preview. You can also see under the hood very, very easily. Another cool feature we have is this ability to split traffic. This is useful for A/B testing. It's also useful for companies that are trying to go from a legacy stack to a modern stack like Redwood. You can kind of splice together your site in an enterprise manner. You'll be able to say these parts will be Redwood today and these ones will be Redwood tomorrow. You can kind of gradually migrate them without a big bang rewrite, which risks things. And then you can split test between them. And you can say, well, is my conversion rate better? Is my performance better? And so you can basically query off of anything. As you can see all these lists of conditions, and then you can kind of rearrange these rules, and you can split test very easily. And then the last thing for the audience here is, Redwood uses GraphQL. GraphQL is a post-based format, which means most CDNs won't cache it. We have GraphQL caching built into the platform. So I'll let Tristan spend just a minute or two talking about that.
Thanks, Ishan. Yeah, let me share my screen here. So David, I basically took the example that you put together for the deploy target, and I don't know why I didn't even think about this when we first started, building the GraphQL functionality into it. But let me just refresh here and just kind of give you an idea. This is how the deploy target example works right now. And the API request, it's going out, it's obviously making a remote request, and it's fairly quick here. But one thing I wanted to kind of show is what happens when we have like a really slow API request. And so what I've done in the
Tristan, this is because I had this question when we came in. I keep going with the demo, but Redwood has a routes file. Mm-hmm. And when we were working on this and you were walking me through this setup, I'm like, what are they hijacking our routes? Like, what are they doing? So this is exactly what Ishan just talked about. Yeah. With the ability to write your logic in the functions. So thank you. I just wanted to call that out because any Redwood devs might have missed the fact that this is the layer 0 routes file, and this is where the magic happens.
Yeah, good call out. Yeah, we definitely have the Redwood JS routes, but then we have our layer 0 router on top of that. And so the connector that I had worked on is basically uses it proxies all of the requests that come into layer 0. And then it determines like if it's a static asset or if it's an API function, it knows exactly how to route that through Redwood JS. And so by default, the basic router is very simple. We tell it to use the connector and all the magic happens behind the scenes. But one of the things I wanted to do was kind of just show what happens when you have a really slow route. So what I've done here, like Ishan mentioned with GraphQL, it's just using a post request for the query. So I'm just kind of intercepting this post request. And what I'm telling it to do is use the render with app callback. And what that does is it literally just takes a request and passes it to the back end. And I'm just adding a 2-second delay on the response, just so that we can show like kind of how slow things can possibly be. So I saved that, and let me refresh here. And you can see it's significantly delayed. And then, so going back, we can define a GraphQL operation, and you can, this specific operation I'm trying to target here is the blog post query. And then, so what I'm doing is basically saying, okay, at the edge, I want this particular request to be cached for 1 hour. And these are processed in the order of which they are defined. So I can still have the 2-second delay one down here. But since I'm setting the cache one first, it's anytime a request comes through and it sees that this has been processed previously, it's in the cache, it's automatically going to serve that from the edge rather than actually having to go all the way back through the serverless tier and process this through the actual Redwood application. So I've uncommented that. Now let me just go back here and I'll refresh. Now the first refresh is going to be slow just because it hasn't had time to cache anything yet. So this still should have the 2-second delay. And actually, if I look back here in the console, let me move we could see down here that layer 0 outputs some of the information of the request coming through. So this is the GraphQL function, and we can see that it was cached as an OK response. So now any further requests for this, it just appears instantly. And you can go back through and look at your log output, and it's showing, okay, now we've got, oh, where'd it go now? I uploaded too much. Yeah, so right here, now we can show that it was a hit from the cache at the edge. And it just makes, it's going to reduce your costs. So that way, these requests that aren't going to change a whole lot, you're not going to have to go all the way back to your serverless tier and accrue costs from running these same requests over and over again. So very, very beneficial for GraphQL and caching your responses that don't change a whole lot.
One thing I want to call out here that's a little subtle is he's demoing this locally. One of our insights was this idea that, when you normally have a stack, you have your server code, your database, and your browser code, and they all run locally. Then they all run in pre-prod, and they run in staging, and they run in production. But historically, the edge and the CDN always was at the very end. You didn't have a local version of that. And imagine if I told you you're going to make a database schema change, but you can only test it in production. That would be crazy. Here, what we're doing is we're trying to bring the edge entirely through that whole life cycle for developers.
Yeah, thank you. So Tristan, this is what I was going to get to the end of our conversation together and say, hey, could we do this demo together and build this out? Because that's what I want Redwood users to see next, is what you can do inside of the layer 0 routes.js. And here it is. You read my mind.
Yeah, I mean, this
Let's
is definitely,
document
this is literally just the copy of this deploy target CI. So what I'm going to do is, like I said, we were so busy before trying to get all this together, it completely went through my mind. But I'm definitely going to open this up, this pull request for you, so that way others can come in here and look at the example on how to implement such.
Yeah, fantastic. And is that something? So if people are new to Redwood and how Redwood supports built-in deployment, you would start with. You might have seen a lot of things that felt complex to you, but with Redwood, it's as simple as one CLI command, Redwood setup deploy layer 0. And all of that config is already done. That's the work that Tristan and the layer 0 team has done for you. So you're just ready to go. And then you can deploy. So what you just showed me on the caching side, that file's already there at config setup time.
Correct.
So is there more that can be done at the time of setup, or would that then be, customization from there? Or I guess that's what I want to explore with you next.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you run the setup deploy target, it's going to basically initialize your Redwood application to have the layer 0 router and all the configurations ready to go. And then you can go into those files and make the additional changes that you want to do. So You will, because when you set up Redwood the first time, it's going to ask to actually install the Layer 0 CLI as well. And that's where we can go through and simply run like Layer 0 dev, which is how I started that project under Layer 0 running in front of Redwood. And then that's where you can go through and actually run dev locally and emulate caching, which is what I just showed. So there's more functionality you can do outside of that using actual Layer 0 CLI.
Fantastic. Thank you. Every time someone I don't know before shows up and starts working on features functionality for Redwood, it blows my mind. I'm like, who are these people? Why are they putting in so much time? We feel really honored. And Tristan, especially at the buzzer to get this in for 1.0, you did a lot of work over a few weekends and traveling, and it was just a pleasure to work with you. Ishan, it's been really fun to get to know you. And I love that your vision or for what you see in Redwood, right? There's some synergy in the vision you see forward, and we'd love to keep that going and really look forward to it.
Absolutely.
So more demos and examples to come. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We've got more to go. You're welcome to stick around. If you have other things to go to, it's always that awkward Zoom thing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm on stage, feel free to turn off your video. And we've got one more, and then we'll call it. But what a wonderful day. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right. Is it working? Maybe. There it goes. I recognize that name.
Hey, Matt.
Hey,
Thanks for joining us today.
thank you and congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been a long road to Redwood JS 1.0, but this is really, so this is Matt, CEO and co-founder of Netlify. We go way back. I met Matt right when it was just him and Chris starting off Netlify, and we'd meet in the dog patch and talk about what they were doing, and was Jamstack going to be a thing? Should it be called Jamstack? How are they going to use that term to educate the ecosystem in what that kind of stack was? And really, Redwood owes its existence to Netlify and the inspiration that I had from the combination of the static hosting with the Lambda function hosting and making that really easy to do in one code base. So thank you for creating the impetus for Redwood to exist at all, to see if we could create something to leverage that. Now Redwood has expanded to be able to deploy in all kinds of different ways. But I'm so excited about the future of Netlify. I should say I'm on the Netlify board, so I may be an unbiased opinion on here, but it's because I believe in Netlify and what you all are doing. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks for also the feelings go the other way as well, right? Like, it was really impactful for us when we first met, when we were just two people starting out Netlify, and you became one of the early angel investors even before we had closed a seed round, and then I also really remember sitting down over beers, either at the Triple Voodoo or Longbridge Pizza or one of those spots in Dogpatch, and having the first talk about starting like a full stack framework for Jamstack apps, and seeing you get started with Redwood. So that's also been amazing to see that progress, and now starting to see like startups being built with Redwood, and starting to work with a couple of those as well.
Yeah, I love it, and a lot of people are deploying to Netlify, and it's great to see the scale that one can get from a serverless platform like that, and how easy you make it to get the Redwood infrastructure deployed in that way, zero cost scale as you need. So that's been really great. Well, I'd love to ask a little bit about what's going on over at Netlify. What's new? Are there any things that you want to share with us, or?
Yeah, I mean, we always have we're always keeping busy, right? Like, so some of the new things we've launched this quarter, and one of them was scheduled functions. That's something that people have been asking for a really long time, and I'm really excited about how we got the developer experience around that launched. Brought on board Simon, that had started a project called Quirl around like really building sort of this seamless developer experience around background jobs and scheduled jobs and workers and so on. And we took a lot of the learnings from that and built it into like really, I think, really intuitive functionality for building scheduled tasks for any of these kinds of apps. So that's been one of the releases I've been excited about. And then of course, just over a month ago or so, we launched Netlify Graph, which aligns us a lot with the philosophy of Redwood, also in sort of really picking like GraphQL as like the standard to build on and the query language to build around. Really centered around like this thought that as this decoupled approach to building for the web is just only progressing more and more. And by decoupled, I mean like we're starting to more and more have it just be the default that you work and build the web UI layer as its own thing, and that your backend business logic splits into all these different APIs and services, where a lot of times some of them are your own running in a Kubernetes cluster or in serverless functions or whatever, and then a lot of them are other people's services like Auth0 or Contentful or Algolia or Stripe and so on, right? And as that really becomes the main way we architect applications, then the next sort of point of friction for developers navigating this is really that now every single project ends up involving connecting to 3, 4, 5, 6 different APIs and services with each their own access tokens and with each their own SDK to talk to them, and often with completely different even styles of APIs. And we want to try to really unify that and give developers just like a straightforward way to first authenticate and manage tokens, secrets, all of that. And then second, to actually query across these different APIs and services from just like one single GraphQL endpoint. So that's a pretty new release from us. It's in public beta right now. Everybody can go test it out, and we're still very much iterating on sort of the core experience around how do we make this intuitive and approachable.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to experiment more with that. I think
Yeah.
from a Redwood architecture perspective, I think it could fit in really nicely in that Redwood is a GraphQL API backend, and be able to start stitching these things together, and how easy that you make it to connect to other third-party GraphQL APIs with all the credentials living in Netlify, so that nobody has to deal with that, because that is a tremendous amount of complexity, shall we say.
Yeah, it's a lot of even just like there's a lot of decision making going into it every time, like you start a project and you start talking to an API, and you have to now start making all these decisions of like, okay, what kind of token do I need? What kind of connection do I need? Where do I want to store the secret? How do I want to set up like refresh cycles if the token requires like a refresh token? And what kind of SDK do I need to use to talk to this API? Often you start searching in NPM, and there's a bunch of different packages and so on, right? Like, and I think if we can bundle some of that up and just like, here's a way to just click a button to OAuth with a service, and now you can start talking to that service. We can help teams really move faster. And I think in that way, there's also a philosophical alignment with part of what you've been looking to do with Redwood around like all these decisions when you start a new project on like, how should I structure my code, and what kind of bundlers should I use, and how should I talk to the API layer, and how should I like build loaders into my system? Can we just like give developers an out of the box solution so they can actually focus on what they're building on, and not on each of those small like paper cuts of micro decisions along the way?
Yeah, as more things become GraphQL in the world or available via GraphQL, this kind of comprehensive unified API becomes a possibility, though still comes along with its complexities, and that's part of it. I think there's still further to go, but hopefully we can get there together.
Absolutely, absolutely. what have you been the most excited about in the 1.0 launch of Redwood?
Being done with the main 1.0 features so we can start other cool stuff, to be honest.
Nice.
Matt, I think you missed it, but Tom said earlier, I think it was only 1 year off on the date of our 1.0 release. So
Only 1 year, like
only 1 year. What's a year? We packed in a lot. I guess you'd call it scope creep, but I think as we learned what it was that we were building along the way of building it, as you know, that it became necessary to more tightly integrate more pieces into the equation. And some things took longer. We started, I'm not sure if you'd met Michael Chan, he might be listening in, but the work we did to have a first class integration with Storybook, for example, and getting service workers with cells and all of that just magically working from front end to back, that it took time, it turns out. So anyway, we're really, really proud of what this community has put together, and the overall 1.0 developer experience has been really, really just a joy to use. So, and I will just say it has been such a pleasure to work with your team. Since there was a couple Redwood core team at the start, and there was Netlify and Prisma, and in shared Slack channels. Actually, I think we were just all in the same Slack channel. Like there wasn't like the company shared Slack channels, just everyone was in the same channel. And you all were there to do what you needed to do to help us get that vision out of the gate with 0.1. And there was just tremendous support all along the way. And you guys finding out ways, how to build. And I think you changed your build context and environment, adapted just for this like crazy, not even released publicly thing. Prisma was doing the same, but we just wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for those teams earlier on, or we wouldn't be where we are today, for sure. So thank you. Have you met the Chan before?
No, I don't think we've met.
All right.
We've met before.
I don't think so. This is the first time. So pleasure to meet you.
Thank you for coming on screen.
I'm a
Michael.
big fan of like 1,000 people at your company. So you hire well, that's for sure.
So am I. I always feel that's the biggest privilege of getting to build Netlify, is to get to work with all these amazing people that's chosen to join forces with us.
Yeah.
And I also really, really happy that we could be helpful in sort of the journey of Redwood, right? Like it's always been one of the core ideas of Netlify, that we wanted to build like a broad platform, fundamentally just around this idea of decoupling the web UI layer from all the backend business logic layer, and then really reducing the friction for all the developers that work on the web UI layer. But as part of that, we also really wanted it to be a place where people could come build the new framework and build the next thing that would move the category forward and would sort of help the whole category of how we build for the web advance, rather than focusing like just solely on us building some kind of vertical solution for our customers, right? Like we really saw it as a way of like, can we build a company that can help the general ecosystem grow and advance, so the web itself gets healthier and better place to build for.
Agreed. And that's, this is some of the philosophy that's made Redwood the way that it is, the decoupled front end and back end. And, there's like every architecture has its pros and its cons, and it's been really fascinating to sort of navigate those and see what works and where the improvements need to be, and then slowly chipping away at those. DT, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Hi, Matt.
Hey.
So I wanted to share a story. So I think part of the reason that I'm part of the Redwood core team is really from Netlify. And I found our first contract back when I was on Sports Innovation Lab, December 5th, 2016. And the reasons that we went with Netlify back then were many, but the first thing is Auth0 support, January 2017, and fine-grained permission and role-based access on FilePath, guaranteed by April 2017. And it's through that experience in auth and role-based auth through Netlify, which is one of the first things I did and helped out with Redwood. So everything all comes together. So I just wanted to share that story and say thanks for all that.
And things like that, I very much remember back then the feature request for fine-grained access control and sort of trying to figure out, this seems like something that would be generally useful for anybody building on Netlify, and then just figuring out a plan, doing it, shipping it, and now it's something that lots of large enterprise customers are even building around and using, right? Like, so thank you. It's been awesome.
I think that worked out well for us too. I like that. DT's been well, he's owned a lot of things for the Redwood project, so we're really glad it worked out that way as well, DT. So Matt, what are some of the more obnoxious requests we've had for what we wanted Netlify to do for us? I mean, come on, we've thrown a lot at you guys. What are some highlights of the things that weren't quite a fit? Anything come to mind?
I think it's actually never around things that are not really a fit. I think where there's still work to be done is around, like, I think when we look at our broad customer base, and especially like the large scale real world project, the reality is that most of them are really focusing on like the web UI layer as a self-standing layer, and often use, like, of course, like serverless functions is one of the key features that all the larger customers use, but they are often used as sort of kind of like a backend for the front end. That, like, if you look at a team like Twilio, right? Like if you log into Twilio today, that whole SaaS application runs on Netlify, right? But obviously Twilio has not made any attempt and will probably never do so on re-implementing their core APIs and services and serverless functions, right? Like they run in Kubernetes clusters with very large teams around them, and with their own complex deployment mechanisms and so on, right? So often the function layer becomes more of a layer for managing the glue code between the web UI and the backend. And I think one of the interesting points with Redwood is that it's sort of pushing the boundaries of building like a whole full stack app just with that stack of the web layer and the serverless functions, right? And I think there's for sure still hurdles and still experiences that could be better in terms of like, how do you actually talk to databases from that layer without like running out of connections? Most database protocols are stateful rather than stateless, right? Like, so just having a whole bunch of stateless functions spinning up and down is often something that the database itself gets really unhappy with really fast, right? And there's areas there that I feel we haven't quite given like the ideal right solution to yet, right? So I think in the terms of like the feature requests and wish list items that sort of pushes against where we are right now, that's probably the main area where I think like it will take longer before the full end-to-end experience of like full stack, both API and front end together, is as great as it will become.
Yeah, agreed. We've jammed a lot into those little functions. But what I love is that your team was always willing to, you took every request and conversation and meeting and, let your imagination stretch along with our outrageous visions for what could be done. And thank you.
And that's the fun part, right? The fun part of building a platform is having people push the limits for what it can do, right? And you learn from that. And the interesting thing is that now we're even seeing like sort of a whole ecosystem start trying to solve those problems, right? So now there's like, I'm sure Tom has spoken to a ton of them, and I've spoken to a ton of them, and investor of several of the sort of next generation of serverless databases that are sort of built ground up to work well with this kind of infrastructure and make it really seamless and easy to work with. And all of that is sort of right now, I think, in the state where something like headless commerce were at maybe 3 years ago, right? Where there's like a bunch of different people starting to do something, but no sort of clear big players that are enterprise ready and everything. And I think in 3 years from now, that whole landscape of what it looks like to work with applications built with this infrastructure will be very different than it is right now.
The landscape is definitely evolving. And when I see things like React 18 and of the streaming updates, people talking about edge rendering, those things I think have the capability to transform the landscape, but also potentially make it more complex. And so how do we as a framework provider help people manage that complexity, but still take advantage of those characteristics?
Yeah, I totally agree. That's been also one of my constant concerns, right? Like as everything evolves, how do we keep some of the patterns around like real simplicity that can make applications easy to reason about, easy to operate, easy to fix when they break, and also how can we make sure that the layers we build as a platform and the standards we build on as a platform also are in line with this idea of openness that's the whole reason that we are all, I think, passionate about the web, right? Like, especially as we see, for example, these edge runtime layers emerge and so on, right? Like, what can we do to make sure that they are built on open standards and open runtimes versus like going more and more into a world where you sort of have a set of different proprietary application platforms you can write for. So that's some of the things we're looking at as sort of how do we set the right direction as a platform that all of these tools should like to integrate with and build around.
Yeah, we think about that a lot. Having Redwood want to target multiple deployment platforms.
Yeah.
Thinking about some of these more advanced features, especially around things like caching or SSR, incremental build, those types of things tend to start to deviate at the different providers. And then then what do you do?
Yeah, that's challenging, right? And it's also why when we implemented some of those functionalities, we tried to start with an open like community RFC around distributed persistent rendering, try to see can we help build some common patterns and some common grounds that are not too tied to any specific provider. Like we always see it as like at the runtime layer, Netlify should be just build on open standards, right? Like something you deploy to Netlify, you should be able to take it and run it somewhere else. Otherwise, we're doing something wrong, right? And then we should win the long-term business and love from our users by making the end-to-end experience of using our platform and the productivity you get for it like best in class. But it shouldn't be from just locking them into some proprietary stack.
Yeah, it's definitely the long strategy, playing the long game, trying to be agnostic of any specific individual framework, but creating the building blocks and then trying to propagate those so that other people can use the same kinds of things and create some sort of standardization across platforms, at least well enough to make framework author lives not completely ridiculous. See how that goes.
Thank you for that. We do appreciate. Well, and that's in being at the head of that business, that company, Matt, that's a brave and bold vision to have. But anyway, downstream of that, thank you. And it sounds like we have a whole lot more things to collaborate on in the months and years to come. So thank you for your time. I'm gonna bring this. We could keep talking with you for a long time. The stories. Thank you. I intentionally I'm grateful you could make this time slot. I wanted to end here because I just knew that this true partnership and friendship between you and Tom going way back, was really one of the seeds that was planted and this redwood grew. Do you like how I did that? But it's very true. It's very true. So we have one more day of the launch week to come. Matt, if you've been following along, we did all our announcements on Monday. Yesterday, we had an amazing startup showcase, 13 different demos. There could have been a whole lot more, 2 panels. And there's now a Netlify, there's a Netlify fund, right? So, I mean, talk about circles coming all the way around.
Yep.
There is now a Redwood-based startup using Redwood to build, that is funded by Netlify. And I mean, all that just happened over on the side. Like,
Yes.
it's pretty awesome. So that was yesterday. And then today was a chance to hang out with all of our partner collaborators that have helped make this framework amazing. And tomorrow is Startup Day, because Redwood is all about helping more startups explore more territory more quickly. And we're doing an office hour session. We've invited all the companies that are in the Redwood Startup Club to come, and we have a big announcement that we're going to kick it off with. And Rob's in charge of a few things. What that means, it's going to be a lot of fun. So anyway, that's all tomorrow. So that's a pretty good launch week, don't you think, Matt?
It's amazing. Great
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, it's 2 years. It just took us 2 years. So hey,
Here's the
go ahead,
plan.
Tom.
No, I have nothing new to say.
Okay,
Other than launch week is exhausting. But I mean,
it is, and that's why we only do it every 2 years. Okay, I have one more goodie, Matt. This is for you. We showed this at the very beginning, but I'm going to do it again, much to Rob's chagrin. Overplay. You can't overplay something that's amazing. Let's just make sure that the video, I think we're going to have audio here, looks good. All right, we'll end with this. Matt, thank you. And everyone enjoy. We'll catch you all tomorrow.
thanks, Matt.
Look at that. Redwood just went 1.0. It's about time. It's been like 2 years. Huh. How can a tree go 1.0? What? No, the JavaScript framework. Java. Oh, let me instantiate an abstract interface service worker bean. No, JavaScript. Oh. Hey, have you tried building a web app with JavaScript lately? It's a nightmare. Oh man, I know, it sucks. But that's why Redwood's so great. Everything's already set up and ready to go. You can just start building a full stack app, front end and back end. Not have to worry about all that config. Like Webpack? Yeah, it's ready to go. Babel? Included. TypeScript? Yeah, I know, but it's in there. Everything's TypeScripted. TypeScriptable? Okay, but there's a million other things you need for a full stack app. Some kind of SPA library, an API server. If it's full stack, you need access to a database. You gotta have some kind of auth, tests. It's got all that. React, GraphQL, Prisma, Storybook, Jest. Huh, it really does sound like it has everything. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Why do they call it Redwood? I don't know. They like trees, I guess. Yeah, trees are cool. Yeah. So you're gonna give it a try? Planting a tree? No, Redwood. Oh, no. I only write Java.
Oh, I love it so much. And there it is. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining. And this video will be posted live, not live. The recording will be posted onto our YouTube channel for everyone that stuck around. Thank you so much. Fantastic. Tristan, Mike, I see you all there. DT, thank you. Such a pleasure. Redwood is much more amazing than it ever would have been. Thanks to all of you. So, all right. Tomorrow, big announcement.
Tomorrow.
Big capital B, capital A, capital G announcement. Bye, everyone.
Bye.